Hey everyone, welcome to summer. If you live in southern Ontario like me, it's been summer for quite a while. I love this planet. I love what we're doing to it. So when I first started this channel, I let everyone know that, yeah, I'd still be making manga videos every now and then, not as frequently. And yeah, I've made one in a year and a half. Listen, sometimes it just works out like that. I don't know, man, leave me alone. However, I feel like I have finally read enough manga to warrant a new video. And we have 3 to talk about today, some of which I have promised I would read a very, very long time ago, but let's not think about that. It's all done. We're good. Alright, so the first big manga I wanted to talk about today is The Land of the Lustrous, one I finished earlier this year, and one that ended earlier this year, which was a pretty big deal because this was a series that was notorious for its hiatuses. And I do think it was very wise that I waited so long to read it so I could be there for when it did end. This is a very unique story. It takes place in the far future after humanity is long gone, follows these rock people who are like this next evolution of life. They have a very chill coexistence, you know, they frolic through the fields and yeah, I guess that's really all they do. But every now and then they do face a threat because there are some moon people. Moon people come down from the moon and try to capture them. So some of them are like more warrior rocks and they fight off the moon people and they're usually pretty good at it. So yeah, everything is chill, everything is lovely. And our main character is Phospholite, a gem who is pretty unremarkable until they get caught up in an unfortunate conflict with a moon person one day and let's just say some things start to change about them. Really don't want to get too much into this here, because I think one of the most interesting things about this story was sort of figuring out where it was actually going. Because I ain't lying when I said this one took me a good while to get into. It's a very odd story and setting. Very, very unique. Definitely one that takes a while to sink its teeth into you just because of how unorthodox it is. I say maybe once I was like 3 or 4 volumes in, when things really started to get moving, I began to not only understand, you know, what the point of this rather slow burn start was, but also realize that, okay, yeah, I am kind of invested now, all this crazy stuff is happening, oh my god. And yeah, it ends up turning into this like sprawling epic story about 2 societies sort of learning to understand each other, as well as the crazy changes that Phospholite is undergoing. I don't actually know if I'm even saying that name right, but what, you know. And yeah, I'm probably not the first person to say this, but it might be a masterpiece. It's actually incredible, man. I feel kind of bad. Like this whole time I was just looking at it, I'm like, okay, it's just Steven Universe, but it like, you know, and you know, it might not be entirely beating the Steven Universe comparison allegations in certain areas. It's just an extremely well-told story with lots of exciting action, mystery. The way it is constantly sort of uprooting itself and changing every status quo you thought you knew was so fascinating, man. I actually think one of the best comparisons I can make to another manga I've read is Attack on Titan, and I do mean that in a complimentary way, as I feel this series handles a lot of its ideas and themes better than Attack on Titan did. Its entire climax was just so stunning, and its conclusion was very thought-provoking as well. If you're a fan of sci-fi fantasy action manga, I honestly think this is a must-read. It might take you a while to get into the swing of things. Yeah, highly recommend. 5 stars, I guess. Yeah. Okay, next up is Eden, It's an Endless World. A series I had heard fantastic things about before, also a series I had heard not so great things about before. It's sort of a semi-post-apocalypse. It takes place in the future after a virus wiped out a significant portion of the planet, but not all of it. Humans are still here, and things have not been going well, let me tell you. Everyone is fighting, society's gone down the shitter, it's a nightmare. They've invented cyborgs, but they're just using it to kill people. It's rough, man. And our story follows an incest baby. It's actually really fun, like the intro of this story is like this brother and sister who believe that they're the last people on Earth, so they make plans to have a baby, which, you know, okay, nasty, but if you're the last people on Earth, I guess. But then they find out that they aren't the last people on Earth and then decide to have the baby anyway. Anyway, we're following this baby. I hate to start this kind of negative, but I kind of forget what this is about. Like, it's been several months now at this point. I really should not have waited so long to make this video. Right, he's trying to save his sister from, like, this evil corporation, I think. God, I did read this, didn't I? Yeah. Well, this is embarrassing. Okay, the reason I don't think this stuck with me, and the reason I wasn't a huge fan of it, was sort of its whole style of storytelling. it is telling this overarching story about this kid. In many ways, it's a coming-of-age story. But it also feels very episodic, always focusing on these other characters, sort of bringing the plot away to tell their story before we get back to the main stuff. I found it very hard to connect with a lot of these characters because of how often we were just constantly jumping to the next thing, and nothing felt super unique or original, as far as this, post-apocalypse sci-fi setting went. It definitely did have some parts that were well written and engaging, and I'm not gonna knock the action, because the action was actually really fantastic in places here, but yeah, it's just not a series I was connecting to very well. And like about halfway through, it does this insane pivot. So our main character is like 15, and he goes to live in a brothel, and the owner there, this lady who's like at least 10 years older than him, basically like they fall in love and start a very graphic sexual relationship. So yeah, first of all, that age gap, yikes. I understand, when you're telling mature stories, like the need for, more intimate moments. I do not mind sex being a part of the story. But when you go from this very dark and gritty, mature story about the corruption of the remains of humanity to what is essentially porn, I don't know. It doesn't really sit right with me. I feel like this is a PG-13 channel, okay? I don't really want to repeat what I read in this series. But I will say it was extremely over the top, extremely comical, and quite frankly, disgusting. Honestly, keep it behind closed doors. I ain't here to kink shame, people like what they like, but Jesus Christ, man. Also, again, it's like pedophilia. Yeah, like this whole section is like 10 chapters long in the middle of the series. Really, really odd. And then eventually, like, the series goes through, like, sort of another transformation. We're on, like, this new arc. It's years later. But by this point, I had, like, really completely checked out. Like, I just was not into it, really. Again, this is a series that does a lot of cool things, and I can definitely understand why people might love it. Except for, like, all the weird sex stuff. But it's just one that didn't connect with me from the start. If I didn't promise people I would have read this, I probably would have dropped it long ago. And yeah, like, check this one out if you're curious. But again, I didn't hate it or anything. I'd probably give it like a 3 stars, but yeah, not one I'll ever really check out again. Okay, enough of that. This is why you're all here. It has been about, and I checked, like, almost to the day, 10 years since I first read Soul Eater. And it is a series that I have loved for 10 years. Technically even more, because I'd watched the anime before that. It was just so cool. The action and the characters were so good. It had so much style. To this day, this has one of my favorite manga art styles. Atsushi Okubo was absolutely cooking here. So as you would expect, in late 2015, when Okubo put out his follow-up to Soul Eater, Fire Force, I was over the moon with excitement. So I started it, and after a few chapters, I sort of fell off. A couple of years later, a lot had come out, so I was like, okay, let's do this. So I read a bit more, and I fell off. A few years later, the anime had come out, and I'm like, okay, finally, I'll give it a shot. This seems like a really good adaptation. I watched like half of the first season, and I fell off. And at that point, I finally realized something I maybe should have long ago. Fire Force might not be as good as Soul Eater. But that was long ago, and despite what I thought of it, the series would go on to have a long and successful run, with its anime still in production and the main series having ended a year or two ago. But you see, my buddy Shrugpod, who, like me, massive fan of Soul Eater, has been telling me ever since the series ended that I have to read it. And I'm like, man, I've tried multiple times, I'm just not into it. And he's like, no, I get it. You have to read it. And I didn't get it. I'm like, what are you doing, man? You're just trying to make me read like 300 chapters a mid? What is this? He finally convinced me, though, by agreeing to a trade where, if I read all of Fire Force, I can pick a manga for him to read, which I haven't done yet. I'm very excited to start looking into that. But anyway, here we are now in 2024, and I've read all 34 volumes of Fire Force, and so for those who don't know, okay, Fire Force follows Shinra, who is a 3rd generation fire soldier, I think. He can control flames. He's got crazy flame powers. Everyone here has got crazy flame powers. And there are people in this world who spontaneously combust into flames, and it's the job of these fire soldiers in the Fire Force to not only stop these rampaging flame people, but get to the bottom of why these raging flame people even exist. And of course, there's a big government conspiracy. There's all this religious stuff going on. People are trying to revive some, evil powers and whatever. This thing here ain't much, okay? It is very simple weekly shonen storytelling. Multiple different story arcs, you know, a big bad group of villains we gotta take out. You know, all the characters on the team are unique and quirky and have their own battles and whatever. I've been doing this a while, okay? I know how this goes. I've seen it a million times. Some series do this formula extremely well and thrive on it. Fire Force, not really one of them. Now, the Soul Eater's a weird series, man. You know, a lot of it didn't really make any sense. A lot of Okubo's mentality when it came to this was just, whatever, it's cool. And it ended up working. Like, if you think too much about Soul Eater's world and its, like, lore, it really falls apart. Like, the world building is definitely not Soul Eater's strong suit, and Okubo knew that because he doesn't really explore it at all. Who cares about the logistics of Death City? Literally, who cares? Maka's got a giant scythe, and she's slicing people up, and it's awesome. But Fire Force does lean into its world building, does lean into its lore, which is very extensive and very complicated. And Okubo is not very good at it. There's so much dialogue here, so much exposition, and it's always awkwardly placed too. Like, you know, we're getting all the cool action, whatever, but then it'll just be characters talking about the Adola burst and the Cataclysm and the Flame People, like I did. And they're also introducing concepts like way later into the series than they should be. Like, there was crucial exposition that feels like it should have been introduced on page 1, not chapter 50, which almost feels like Okubo was sort of making things up as he goes. And it just leaves this whole world and pretty much everything in it feeling very sloppy. You also have the issue of the characters, where they're all kind of fine on paper, you know, they really pale in comparison to the style and the pizzazz that the Soul Eater ones had. Like, they were all so instantly iconic, and these guys, I don't know, man. Like, maybe it's just the designs, they're wearing all the same, but these guys don't really do it for me. The action is cool, you know, it's serviceable, there are some cool and creative powers on display, but all reading Fire Force did was make me think of series that I like more. And there's also the issue of fan service, which, you know, Okubo is a bit infamous for. Soul Eater definitely had some questionable stuff, though. It was mostly, like, in the first volume, and then the rest of the series is pretty tame in comparison. Becomes just more, you know, the standard stuff you get in shonen manga. But Fire Force introduces us to Tamaki, who is interesting. This is the first time I've seen a fan service character who has an actual in-lore reason for why she is constantly having her clothes blown off and why people are always accidentally groping her. Like, it's an actual medical condition that she has. It's one of the most insane things I've ever seen, and it leads to some of the most obnoxious and outright insulting fan service I've ever seen in a battle manga. Occasionally, there is like a funny gag or joke that he does with this, but it is mostly just very off-putting. And because Okubo was not very good with his lore, I didn't actually find out that Tamaki was a minor until way later in the series. I literally thought that all of these people were like at least in their mid-20s, so that also didn't help at all. But folks, there are some details that I have been leaving out. So the thing with all the manga is, you know, they often take time to get going. I mean, I just talked about Land of the Lustrous. And it's very common you hear people say, oh, wait until chapter 5, wait until volume 10. Now, One Piece really gets good at volume 45, let me tell you. And I don't always think this is super justified, because, you know, I believe that series should really grip you from the start. Even though I have read series that I do think get much better as they go, I still don't really like using this excuse. Anyway, Fire Force gets good at chapter 230. And when I say it gets good, I mean this is like one of the most entertaining things I've read all year. And it's not because it's particularly well written, but this is when Okubo just suddenly decides to get the sauce again. To become the Rizzler that he once used to be. These story revelations that happen at this part of the series. Have you guys ever read The Dark Tower? Just how insane that series gets? That's the best comparison I have for what happens to Fire Force here. And all of a sudden, the action is amazing. It's like Soul Eater level again. I think this being a weekly series where Soul Eater was monthly, you know, it kind of did hurt Okubo's style a bit, because it never really felt like it had that experimentation, that grand epic scale that Soul Eater had. Likely because he didn't really have the time to do it. But I guess he does now. There's some absolutely incredible iconic fights here in the last part of the story that for the first time actually made me care about some of these characters. And I gotta be honest, the very ending of this story is the most insane thing I've ever read in a manga. I'm not gonna lie. I absolutely loved the final arc of Fire Force, which is not something I ever thought I would say, because this series is like a 3 stars at best. I'm gonna get into spoilers real quick. Like, even if you're never gonna read this, I just want to get out. I just want to get it out, okay? Shinra Kusakabe is Jesus Christ. And I do not mean that in the metaphorical sense, like how Superman is Jesus. I mean that he is the actual second coming of Jesus Christ. Our Jesus Christ. Our world. As in, our world, the one that you and I are physically in right now, is canon in Fire Force. You see, when the Cataclysm first happened, it wiped us out, but it also turned our world into anime. There are entire backstory chapters of this that are fully, like, photographs of real humans. And as this new cataclysm is happening at the end here, it is turning the world more goofy and more cartoony, more into the style of Soul Eater, because Fire Force is the origin story of Soul Eater. And Shinra was born to a virgin mother to become the savior of this world. And they very specifically mean he is Jesus Christ. And yeah, it happens. You know, they win, obviously. And then Shinra just creates all of the Soul Eater characters, and it ends with, like, the Soul Eater characters as kids. Now, that might sound absolutely horrible to some people, and I fully admit it is not the best writing, but come on. That's so ballsy. That's so absolutely insane. Love it. So to quote Paul McCartney, thank you, Shrugpod. I get it now. I am very, very glad that I stuck this through. And if you are someone who has gotten pretty far into Fire Force but ended up dropping it, I actually think it's worth picking up again to just see it through to the end. Though when it comes to recommending the series, like, if you are a massive Soul Eater fan, then I would say, yeah, it's worth reading. But if you're not, like, I don't really think going through over 200 chapters of what I would consider to be pretty mid to get to a good ending, like, I don't think it would really be worth it. But yeah, that's it. That's how it goes. The next manga video I make will probably be My Hero Academia video, as that is about to end, and it's a series I've been following for about as long as Soul Eater. Then I also want to try and catch up on some of the other series that are in my collection. But again, it'll be a while. Manga is no longer my primary focus. And as for the regularly scheduled content, I do have my mid-year tier list coming out, probably around the end of the month, maybe the start of July. Then we'll be fully in the summer, so I'll do my TBR video, give you my updates there. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. You can leave your thoughts on any of these manga in the comments down below. I'll see you all soon. Take care. God bless. Shinra Kusakabe.